And I spent months of my life looking for her. I got a whiteboard in my office, and I started putting down all the facts I could. And I started calling shelters up, and I started to make my life finding her. Prison for me gave me what I needed, and that was the structure. Now, I understand, Matt, why guys don't do well that leave prison. And I didn't initially do well because they used to structure. They have not built a life outside. Their whole life is in the prison system. The people they know are doing time with them. So they get out of prison.
I talked to a CO. I'm sorry. I talked to a CO. I interviewed a CO the other day, and he was saying that he was like, you understand? He said, you're in your own world in there. I mean, I understand, but he's like, even the staff that works there, some of these people are working 60 hours, 80 hours, or 60, 70 hours a week. They don't know anybody that's not, you have just enough time to go home, take a shower, go to sleep, make your meal, go back.
Thank you.
You know what I'm saying? And you do that for a decade, you don't know anybody that's not in that whole system. So when you leave, you don't have anybody that's not still going to work at the prison.
You don't. And
they're really just office friends. You know what I'm
yes.
saying? Like how many jobs have you had where you were buddy all the time, and then the moment the job ends, you have that one dinner with the guy, and then you 2 phone calls, and then it's basically done.
Yes. And that's all true. And, when I got out of doing that routine, I was lost, Matt. I was lost. When I turned in my badge and I didn't have that routine where I had to be there every single day. Now I was in my own business, and it was still difficult. So what I tell the public is this. These guys are leaving with no skill set. They're leaving with a convicted felony on their record. Who's going to hire them? Who's going to hire them? Where did they learn anything? So I got to tell you, it all was heavy. And I often realized that when life would throw me uncertainties, business wasn't good, relationships weren't good. Matt, this is crazy. I think back of my days in prison where everything happens at a certain time. You eat at a certain time, you're locked down at a certain time, there's yard at a certain time. And that structure I got used to. After a decade of that structure, man, I mean, I felt like, that was like, for me, it was like, the structure I needed growing up as a kid. But I get out.
Structure is comforting.
Yes.
Yes. Like, I'm just saying for people watching, they don't, really, I don't think what you're not really explaining in such a way that you understand that comfort, it's the unknown that's so terrifying in life, that structure of, you're in such a great routine or such a solid routine. You take a lot of comfort in that. You go to sleep at this time, you wake up at this time, you eat at this time, you go to rec at this time, you do that. Everything is up. So the moment those structures or that routine they throw a wrench and suddenly there's a lockdown. It's not necessarily that I'm going to be locked in my cell for 2 days. It's that everything's thrown off. You're not eating at 12:30. You're not doing this. You can't make your phone call. You can't do that. You can't watch TV. You can't, you can't see your buddy that you always meet on the rec yard at this time. You can't, and that's what kills you. It's the structure is what allows you to really kind of stay in there for years without going nuts.
Thank you. And when an inmate says he's getting into his sentence, he's used to a structure.
Yeah.
And the same thing. Now, here's the other thing, Matt. The correctional officers have to get institutionalized to do their time. There's no way you could be thinking about the beach, this or that. You have to really be the mindset that you're in that prison. So I started to look at COs. After a year, I'd look at them and they'd look like they had no personality no more. And then they look a little wild-eyed. They look a little rogue. I never wanted to get there, man. I always had some personality. I just really, really wanted to not make that my life. And I was at that point where I had to make a decision. So I get out. And as I was working in corrections, I started the trash business, Matt, and it really took off. I had tremendous success with trash. And
what do you mean?
Well, I bought an old house after I was in corrections about 5 or 6 years, and I started renovating. And I started bringing stuff to the landfill. Then my neighbors need me to bring stuff to the landfill. So you start small like they do in Florida or New York, wherever. You start with a pickup truck, then a pickup truck with a trailer, then a dump truck. And before you know it, I'm in a full refuse truck.
All right.
And I built this business. And it allowed me, first of all, what I had was HR. I had human resources. I had correctional officers that needed to work to get away from corrections, to give themselves a break, get out of. Here's guys already working 60 hours a week, but they don't even know how to communicate with their wives. Hey, Charlie, you got an opening next Tuesday? It's my day off. I'd like to do something with you.
Yeah.
Fine. Then the inmates would get paroled. They'd look you up. So
Yeah.
I had, Matt, at this point in my life, I have LinkedIn with some prominent people on my LinkedIn and contacts. I have prison officials with former inmates that are all connected, because I think just like a veterinarian sees dogs every day and they don't say, oh, this dog's dangerous, this one. They just see it as a dog. Correctional staff, they know that a lot of inmates did a life sentence on the installment plan by reoffending, by doing stupid things, by having drug addictions. So they're able to assess and know that their quiet neighbor down the block could be a bigger psychopath than the guy that's a 3-time felon. And I know that you know what I'm saying with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have success with the trash business, but I never dealt with anything, Matt. I had all this craziness from East New York, the drugs. And even though I'm clean and sober all this time, I just never talked about my feelings. And I never talked about what really hurt me. I never talked about my crazy father. And I really didn't know who my father was. It took my longtime girlfriend, Jen, who back in 2005, when she met my father, she took one look at him and she said to me, Charlie, this guy's a dangerous guy. And I said, well, I know he's got a street name and I know he's quiet. She goes, he's got jailhouse tattoos. Matt, that's how blinded I was. How many tattoo guns have I found, doing a shakedown, and yet he's got jailhouse tattoos, but I got to block that in my mind. These are jailhouse tattoos, vintage jailhouse tattoos from the 50s from Dannemora, Clinton, upstate New York. So time would go on, and I would wind up one day in about 2007 selling my trash business and really doing the things I thought would make me happy, Matt. Okay.
Right.
We all think in our minds that if we get the money, we'll do the things we want.
Yeah.
And the things I wanted was, of course, in 2007, the Escalade changed body styles. I already ordered one of those. I wanted an AMG Mercedes with the suede headliner. And of course, you want a Ferrari. So I was going to do all the things that I always wanted to do, that I seen people on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. So I was able to live my life and do some pretty cool things. But I noticed that in a short order, after a few months, I got used to that. It's like, I've hired homeless people and from the city mission, and they're really grateful that you ask them early on. And back in, the new millennial, if you ask a guy how much money you got in pocket, he say, I got $1 in my pocket. I said, well, you'll have $100 in your pocket by the time. I used to always work 7 hours, because with 7 hours, you get more productivity. And never mistake activity or productivity. So you put $100 in somebody's hand, they're really happy. But after a week or two, they'd be telling you what you're not doing right with your business. So I quickly realized that happens even with money. So initially, it's a big deal to have these cars, but then you get used to them. Then you start nitpicking. Oh man, this thing needs all kinds of maintenance, this and that. Long story short, I take 3 years off. In 2010, I'm going to go back into business because I signed a 3-year no compete with this national company. And they get wind of this and they wind up talking me out of it and give me a really good compensation package, make me a chief operations officer of a national company. And I go to work for them. And it's pretty good at first, Matt. It's pretty nice hours, a lot of vacation time, all the perks. And I get all the ways up into 2012, 2010, 2012. And I'm sitting at my desk in the Midwest. And I always see what's going on in New York, because I'm a New York guy. I always want to know what's going on in New York, just like you want to probably know what's going on in Tampa. And I see that the police shoot and kill a pit bull in East New York. East Village, August 13, 2012. What happens, Matt, is I'm rocked. All this stuff inside me for all these years is friggin', I can't keep it contained no more. I don't know if I want to cry. I don't know if I want to yell. I don't know what's going on. The scene is real simple. There's a video of a pit bull shot out, bled out on the street, a homeless man laying at the curb, and headlines, police shoot and kill pit bull. But for some reason, I don't believe the dog died, man.
Well, real quick, the reason, tell the reason that they shot the dog. I mean,
yep, they shot.
I mean, there was, it's. I mean, they. But I'm sorry. Go ahead. Just explain.
No. And for the listeners, there's actually a Wikipedia on this star of the dog. So what happened was the owner had a seizure, whether it was drug induced or alcohol induced. He had a seizure.
Right.
He's laying out there. A passerby notifies the police, and the police keep everyone away from the guy. And at that point, they're okay. They're in a neutral position. A lady thinks she's going to become an animal trainer and tries to go into the circle, which angers the dog Star. The dog chases the lady off, then turns around and goes after the police officer. And the police officer shoots the dog in the head.
Right.
Dog is wound up. It's such a chaotic scene that there's a 10-minute video online. It's just brutal. It's graphic. Screaming going on. And for all intents purposes, nothing went right after that. The police never checked on the homeless guy. They didn't know what to do. The public's turning on the police. It's a Three Stooges act with all kinds of screaming with this dog bleeding out. Now, Matt.
I wanted to let you guys know that I have a Patreon account. If you're interested in joining the Patreon account, it's got 3 tiers. The top tier, you actually get a different con man painting every single month. If you're already joined and you're already supporting me, I really appreciate that. If you haven't joined yet and you're interested in joining, I'm going to leave the contact information for Patreon in the description. Thank you very much for watching the video.
At the time, I've got a 15-pound little white Jack Russell that I take to the dog parks with Jen, that if a pit bull comes in or a big lab that's assertive or a German Shepherd, I pick my little dog up, because I'm fearful the little dog's going to get hurt because he's got a little bit of a bad attitude. So the last thing in my mind is I'm going to become this emotional over this pit bull, but I do. And the reason why, as a boyhood guy, before I went into rehab and got cleaned up in the monastery, is I had a pit bull that was my companion that I used to take to East New York all the time with me and wound up getting hit by 2 cars. It did survive. And that's about the only kind thing my parents ever did for me is they said, look, we don't care about you, but we care about the dog. We're going to take care of the dog from this point forward. And they took the dog over. And the dog wound up with a good life with them. So getting back to the story of Star, I believe the dog lived. And it was a bizarre statement. The newspaper said she died. And I called everybody into my office to watch this video, Nebraska people, and they looked at it and go, oh my goodness, that's what you're missing in New York? That's crazy. Well, I believe the dog had lived, Matt, and I called the city of New York up.
Why? Why do you think you just...
You know why, Matt? I'm going to tell you why, looking back now. It was faith. It was something bigger than me. Just the way there was Michael at the train station, just like there was the chanting and yelling out God. What had happened 2 weeks before this dog was shot was an Omaha, Nebraska business consultant said to me, he spent some time looking over the business and he said, Charlie, man, bro, he goes, you are really a transactional guy. You're a scorekeeping transactional guy. Everything has a dollar amount on it for you. You're not going to live a long life like this. This is not the way to live a life. And he says, you've got to find something in this life that gives you purpose and happiness that doesn't pay you. And I kind of thought about that. I respected this guy a lot. And, this guy was a clear guy. He was real polite. But, what people don't realize is Nebraska people, Midwest people are very sharp, man. They keep a few rocks in their pocket. Like a New York guy, he lets you know when you're mad at him, when he's mad at you, or he says everything he needs to say. Where a Midwest guy, he can feed you some barbed wire and you don't even know it. So this guy was telling me a lot without being rude. And I wound up listening to him. And I wound up going to his house and seeing a painting of 3 dogs on the wall. And I said, Dave, who's that? You got a painting? He goes, that's my family. He goes, me and my wife elected not to have children. We have dogs. That's our dog family. So I thought it was a little different. But the seeds were there to have faith. Now, Matt, I want to tell you where I was. Prior to Star being shot, or in the street days, if you put the drugs in my hand, I put the money in your hand. I always had to have a quid pro quo. You know, you do for me, I do for you. I didn't believe what I couldn't see, but I believed that this dog lived, and I don't know why. But I called the city of New York, and I used my business line, and I called them up on a recycling. And, you know, this was the headquarters to New York City Animal Care and Control. And I wound up talking to the admin secretary that ran it, Richard Gentle's secretary, was basically his office assistant. And she said the dog was alive. Most likely would die, but the dog was alive. And I said, well, why didn't the headline say the dog died? Well, the public will handle the dog dying easier than they will if it's suffering. And they put that out. And the dog wound up living, Matt. And you're talking about major news. This dog covered major news. It covered global news. It was written about in China, Daily Mail in the UK, Daily News, New York Magazine, People Magazine, you name it, this dog story covered. And they had to go from the dog was alive, then the next headline with the Daily News, the dog is dead, the dog is alive, prognosis isn't good. And the police still tried to fight the headlines. They said, well, this prognosis isn't good, this dog will never live. And the dog wound up living, Matt, and making a lightning speed recovery. Okay? And for the first time in my life, Matt, I felt like I had purpose. And what I did was I stopped thinking about making money. I stopped thinking about cars. I stopped thinking about myself. And I wanted to give this dog an opportunity to heal. And I wanted to give her homeless owner a place to live and a job in Nebraska. So I reached out to the Homeless Coalition. He declined it. And I stayed on course with this dog, and she spent a lot of time in a rehab under a new name. They gave her a new name. They wanted this story to go away really bad, Matt. Basically, different people have wrote about this story. The dog was put in the witness protection program from New York and went to Philadelphia with a new name. Star turned it to Shiloh. And she was put into this long-term rehab. And I spent months of my life looking for her. I got a whiteboard in my office, and I started putting down all the facts I could. And I started calling shelters up, and I started to make my life finding her. And eventually, after months and months of work, I found her, Matt. And eventually, the city of New York allowed me to visit her, but I could visit her without letting the public know. Right. And they would have a reporter there to take photos, and it would make basically the article said, Star's number one fan comes to visit her. And it taught me a lot about the media. Although I was happy to visit her, photos were taken, and they made it feel like a feel-good story where, you know, the dog is going to be okay, everything's good, look somewhere else, forget about this dog. Because like People Magazine even said that, you know, that there are other dogs in a shelter to adopt, and just kind of forget about this dog, you know, that they got this one handled. So, Matt, a lot of stuff was going to happen in my life. And this guy that was once homeless, once addicted to drugs, and was in the streets of East New York, that wound up going to work. And how I did it, I'll never know, man. Wound up working in prison and wind up understanding this. And for those that are lacking hope, to think that, Matt, I've been locked up, man, a lot of hospitals, man. I've been locked up for rehab. I've been locked up in, you know, to get the checkup from the neck up, you know, when you're not well and they're detaining you for a mental evaluation. You know, to think that one day I'd be sitting in front of the Nebraska Supreme Court and my testimony would mean something. It says there is redemption in this country. You know, things can happen for you. But I do believe that we have to get honest what our liabilities are. I think that drug addicts, food addicts, gambling addicts, sex addicts, you name the addict, has to get honest and has to come clean for that healing to happen and that redemption to happen. But eventually, I would adopt this dog. And it didn't go that easy, but I eventually would adopt this dog, and I'd be the legal owner of this dog. Now, at the time, my father gets wind of this. And he says to me, son, you've lost your mind. Your girl's going to leave you. You're making headlines over this dog. He goes, it's a pit bull. It's a homeless drug addict. It's a police officer. Every combination of this story is not a good combination. It's not a feel-good story. You're insane. A Labrador rescuing a kid out of a lake, that's a feel-good story. He says, why don't you get behind a story like that? I said, Dad, that dog will have a fan club. This story has no fan club. It's a pit bull. It's a homeless man that's addicted. That's me. That's the old me. I got to go to bat for these two. And that's what I did. So, Matt, 2 years after the dog is rescued and she's living with me.
It takes 2 years?
No. It took the better part of a year to adopt her. And then when I adopted her, I had to sign all these agreements that I would not tell the public I adopted her. Okay.
Oh, that's nuts.
So I had to sign these papers. I could not post, like she has a Facebook following, like 112,000 people so on Star of the New York Pit Bull. So they wouldn't let me, they said her new name is Shiloh, and they made me sign all this stuff, right, Matt? So I got this dog, Matt, and I got this crazy, crazy story. And I realized that I want to hang out with my dog, man, because this dog has given me a childhood. This dog is giving back to me what I never had as a kid. You know, nobody ever does what they really should do for themselves, okay? You hear people that have had shitty childhood, and they either hit the lottery, they come into some type of generational wealth, somebody leaves them money, and they do the things I do, the stupid things, okay? They go out and buy cars. That doesn't fix the hole in somebody. I had to go back and fix the hole, which I didn't realize it, and this dog gave me a childhood. So I got this dog, Matt, and I'm just so tickled pink to have the dog. I followed the adoption agreement. But I walk her one day, and this guy sees me that knows me as a customer. He's a customer on my trash route. And he says, hey, Charlie, what's your dog's name? And I didn't want to lie to him. I said, Star. He says, oh. He goes, why is she missing an eye? What happened to her? I said, I don't really know, Rob. He says, you adopted a dog and you don't know what happened to her? He goes, how can you care for her? I said, she had some type of accident. He goes, did you get her from back east, from New York? I said, Rob, there's other places rather than New York. You know, it's Philly. I didn't tell him any more details. So at that point, he kept on pressing a little bit, and I got away from him. And he saw me about 2 months later, Matt, and he said, look, Charlie, I got to be honest with you. He goes, I'm all over YouTube. He goes, so is my son. He says, I know this is crazy. I know we're out in Nebraska. He says, I got to ask you. He said, there's a brown and white pit bull that was shot in New York over a year ago.
Right.
It looks just like your dog. He says, is this the dog? I said, Rob, I can't lie. It's the dog. He goes, how'd you do it? I said, Rob, it's a long story. So he hugged me, and that was it, Matt. And at that point, I thought, I'm not going to hide this story no more. So I went to the Gothamist, and they did the Nebraska man adopts dog shot by NYPD, and opened up a floodgate. I've been busy ever since I told this story. So PIX News makes it like their top news. That's New York's biggest news. They make it like their top story of 2014. The dog from 2012 that was shot is this dog. So I do all this stuff, Rob. I'm calling you Matt. I do all this stuff. I told Rob, Matt, Tyler. We do all this stuff. And I'm starting to understand that I got purpose now. I'm starting to understand what the business consultant meant. And I'm starting to have less and less care about props in life. And I'm looking at life differently. So what happens then was this. Me and Jen, she decided to start a nonprofit. We start rescuing dogs, the Star Project. We start giving homeless dogs homes. And we start doing some really great things. And by doing that, we're starting to see the impact. And Star's popularity in the Midwest is just growing. We do Alzheimer's events. We get invited to college classes that teach journalism classes. You name it, we do it. And eventually, as time moves forward, 2018, the monastery hears about this story and invites me with Star, on the one condition I bring Star, to the place that got me clean off of drugs and alcohol over 25 years earlier. And we go up there. And finally, Matt, in 2018, I realized I've got to write a book. I realized that there's just too many details to this story, and I got to write a book. So what the Department of Corrections has taught me is, it taught me not to use hearsay, to go on facts, and not to make opinions, especially with a book. So I wanted this book to be as factual as possible. So I go to newspapers.com and I start pulling up articles to see about the 1969 first methadone death. And then for some reason, I decided to put my father's name in the newspapers.com. And I go, holy shit. 1956, he's arrested for the attempted murder of a New York City cop. He's with my so-called godfather, Joseph Imbruglia. In 1956, he's already a 3-time felon, Matt. In 56, he already did time in Missouri, New York, and New Jersey. And these guys are bad guys. And now this whole picture comes clear. And then I read articles that they're looking for Joseph Imbruglia in 1980 for a $100 million synthetic heroin ring. He's best noted for his participation in the French Connection. So now, not only did this dog bring me to college, get me to write a book, I learned about if I would have never wrote a book, I would have never known about my father.
If you guys didn't know, I also do paintings, and if you're interested in a painting, I'm going to leave my contact information in the description beneath the video. Back to the video.
I never get to confront my father about any of this stuff because in 2018, he goes to the hospital. He was in Florida, and he goes to the hospital for some heat exhaustion. And they mistakenly give him a deadly dose of fentanyl. Now, how does that happen? I mean, here's a guy, how does that happen? Well, we almost didn't know it happened. But, I suggested that if you're not sure about what happened and how he just died, I mean, the guy just died in the hospital. The autopsy, a private autopsy, because the hospital said there was no need for an autopsy. Well, the private autopsy revealed it was fentanyl. And then, of course, you get all the drugs that the hospital gave him, and you compare it, and there's no drug of fentanyl. So it's been an ongoing lawsuit, but that's not my deal. But all this stuff occurred. So 2018, we get through that. I write this book. I don't think I'm ever going to publish the book, Matt. It's too heavy. It really gets into some real darkness of what happened to me. And it really talks about a lot of crazy stuff that happened. But I have the book. It's 102,000 words. I get it professionally edited, and I got this book. 2019 happens. 2020 happens. Then we go into a pandemic. And the world changes for all we know, And I still got this book. And I did a lot of healing, Matt. But Star took a lot of that pain away, and I transferred a lot of my story onto her, and she was the focus. We're giving talks, we're always talking about the dog.
Right.
And what happens, Matt, is in 2021, she dies. She dies, Matt. She wound up with a rare cancer, and she was healthy until she wasn't. I mean, in January, she showed some signs of not having some incontinence. So I took her for the best care I could. I took her to Philadelphia, where they did a sonogram on her, and they discovered that she had cancer and urinary tract cancer, transitional cell carcinoma, which is a deadly form of cancer, a horrible one, not that there's any good cancer. And we had some good times with her. I took all the recommendations from the doctors. I took her to 9/11 Memorial. I took her down to the East Village. People saw her there. I took her to, I should call it the Freedom Tower. And she died on February 21st of 2021. It was my darkest hour. She died in my arms. And I really didn't know how I was going to go forward anymore, Matt, because I really had nothing to go on anymore. The dog had become my life. and the dog had become my identity. And reaching out to people, I said, who the hell's going to want to talk to me? They always wanted to talk to me when I had the dog. And Matt, to take a dog to a monastery that's invited and to see 500 plus men hug that dog and to touch that dog and understand. See, my journey wasn't over. I'd be invited back to the penitentiary and I would be shown that they bring dogs into the penitentiary now and the inmates get to work with dogs. Fabulous program. Should have been done years ago. So the dog dies. I think my life is pretty much done. And Matt, I'm in a bad spot, bro. There's nothing that could get me out of this bad spot. You know, I don't work. I'm comfortable. I'm always in climate controlled, heat, air conditioning. Yeah, I don't want for nothing, but I'm just got a pain factory. I'm in so much pain, Matt. I don't even know how I'm going to go forward, man. Believe it or not, anybody that's listening to this tells me, it's only a dog. No. This was my life, this dog. This dog showed me how to communicate. Matt, I became a prison official and I couldn't write more than a few sentences because if I wrote you a full email, you'd know I'm a dummy that didn't go to school. Everything had to be done by somebody else, okay? I would jot notes, or if I had to send an email out, I had to put it into Grammarly and get it fixed. This dog taught me how to be a writer. She taught me about my family. She had told me how to communicate with people. She brought me to speaking engagements. You name it, this dog did it. So now the dog is gone, and I got to face myself. And man, it's a painful event. But Matt, sometimes, man, in this life, it's the darkest storms that bring out the biggest rainbows. I came out of that deal. I didn't even know if I wanted to live anymore, man. I just was in a really bad spot. There was nothing that was going to make me happy. You can't be happy. The only time you're going to be happy is if you haven't eaten in a while. Or you got shelter from the elements. You give a guy a place to live that's freezing, he's happy. But after a while, man, you get used to it. I have a disease of ingratitude. What does that mean? That means, just like the homeless people I used to hire, after a week or two, they're going to tell me about how to run my business. Well, I've been comfortable for a long time.
Hey, I appreciate you guys checking out the video. Do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, like the video, hit the bell so you get notified of videos like this, and leave a comment in the comment section, and I will try and respond to all of your comments. And I appreciate you checking it out and checking out Charlie's story, and all of his stuff's going to be in the description. And thank you very much for sticking with me. See ya.